Oh, and thank you for joining our webinar today entitled Tricks of the Trade, Electric Radiant Heating for Floors, or mainly tile floors, as it says right there. I'm Scott from Warmly Yours, and
I'm Greg. Hello.
and thank you for joining us today. And we're going to be going over some of the tricks that we've gotten from our customers that they have learned out in the field to go ahead and get these floors put in. So we thought we'd share them with you, and that's why we're here today. If you have any questions for us, please feel free to find that white spot in the middle on the left side of your screen. That's the spot where you're going to type in those questions, and feel free to ask anything you want anytime. And we have a lot of questions that were submitted ahead of time. So we're going to be telling you what's coming up for the next month. So if it piques your interest, you can go ahead and send us the questions when you get your link to sign up for next month's webinar. So questions are great. It helps us give you the information that you are looking for that can help you in everyday life. So Greg, tell us about Warmly Yours and why they should be dealing with us.
Sure. We've been in the business since 1999 in the floor heating industry, and have expanded into many areas related to that, related to cable heating specifically. We were the first in the industry to provide an online tool for project planning and also for overnight plans. If you submit us a floor plan, we're going to get you back a design next business day, which can be very handy. We'll talk about that a little bit in this presentation. And also we offer 24/7 tech support. So Scott and some other people from our office actually take a cell phone home with them, and calls are directly routed to them. So you're not getting service from another vendor, from another party. It's actually direct 24/7 tech support from Warmly Yours.
Yeah, so we can get you your answers. If you're in the middle of installing something and you go, gee, I wonder if I should do this, it's simply just give us a call. We'll give you the phone number at the end of the presentation so you can jot that down. And when you ever have a question, feel free to give us a ring and we'll be able to help you through that installation. So let's talk about electric floor heating for tile, since that's why we're here today. And tell us a little bit about the different iterations of TempZone.
So the two products you're seeing there on the screen, there's the green mesh. Basically what the mesh does is it holds the spacing of the wire in place. It's a stock product in stock sizes. And if you send us a plan, we're going to customize the way it's cut and turned and laid out into the room. So you've got the speed, the availability, the flexibility of a stock product combined with a custom layout. And then the product below, the cable can be used in a couple of ways. Traditionally, the way cable like that has been used is on each side of the room, you put down fixing strips, and then you string the cable back and forth, back and forth. That's still done. That's still done worldwide quite a bit. I was on a job site this morning with someone who that was their preferred method. They like the fact that they put the strips down, they put the cable exactly where they wanted in the job. Another way that's become very, very popular is there are a few uncoupling membranes on the marketplace that are designed to receive the cable. So rather than having to do fixing strips at the end, you're pushing the cable into the uncoupling membrane and stringing it throughout the room. You get the advantage of using the uncoupling membrane, which can help protect the floor, and the speed of being able to use that membrane instead of other backer boards.
Yeah, we'll be talking about membranes a little bit later in the presentation, but we had a question from Pablo, and we thought we might as well address it here about these products. He wants to know what voltages and frequencies are available.
240 and 120 for these products. The frequency is completely a non-issue. The thermostat will adjust to any frequency, and in North America, the frequency is all the same anyway.
Right. So that product will work. It's a dual voltage, dual frequency thermostat. There is no frequency requirement for the cables themselves, so that's a non-issue. And the custom mats are also additionally available in 208. So if you have 208 available in your location, we do custom mats, and those custom mats can be used with 208. Yeah. So that's something good to keep in mind.
And could you use the 240 mats with the 208, right?
You could. It just was going to put out 86% of their rating.
Right, which is still plenty in nearly every application to warm a floor.
So let's talk about how to measure properly for a quote. So if you're going to get ready and you're saying, hey, you know what? I'd like to do this basement that we have here on the screen. What kind of information does a customer need to get to us so we can make sure that we can get a good plan back to them?
Okay. So with measuring, you know, when you measure for flooring, it's a little different. And a lot of times the people that are measuring for flooring are also measuring for floor heating. And in general, if you had a project to measure for flooring, you would take the overall dimensions, figure out the square footage, maybe add a little overage. It's really quick, kind of more on the simple side, unless you have a very, very unusual shape to figure. But it's kind of down and dirty. You just get it done. Measuring for floor heating, it's not complicated, but it's more akin to measuring for cabinets than it is measuring for flooring. We need to know where everything is on the floor. Fixtures, vanities, vents, posts, anything that's touching the floor, we're going to want to design around for you so that on the day of installation, you've got a plan that works really, really well. It's a little more energy spent up front will pay dividends on the day of the installation.
If you look at this plan here, what we added here in red are things that people forget sometimes to put on the plan. And if you add all that square footage that's covered by those red rectangles and boxes, the rectangles being air vents, the boxes being posts that come down to hold up the floor above, you can see each one of those red spots is actually reducing available square footage of the floor.
Yeah.
So as you reduce square footage of the floor, you're then reducing the area that the heating can go into. And if you have measured it exactly and the fit is exactly correct, now you start taking things away, available space, you're going to have too much mat or too much cable. And the thing to remember is that we never heat under permanent fixtures. You're always going to want to field verify your dimensions, which means we're going to talk about the plan here in a minute. But once you get that plan, go in there and make sure that the measurements are correct. Because as measurements change, we know from the day that the drawings get submitted to the day where you're ready to put that product in. Yeah. Sometimes a new tub was put in or they put something there. But you have to remember, you can't put heat under permanent fixtures because it's not allowed by code because it traps the heat. So that's one thing you want to do. So when you're making your drawing, don't forget the little things like the vents and wherever there's a post or wherever there's a permanent fixture. Yep. It's always better to have a little too little than a little too much.
Absolutely.
So let's take a look at this installation plan and what's going on here, Greg.
So what this is a layout for one of the TempZone flex rolls for a 43-foot long roll. And what it is, it's a map to follow on the day of installation to fill it out. It also shows you exactly where the heat is going to be. With any floor heating product that's on the market, the way it works is you're going to get roughly, an inch and a half or so, wouldn't you say, of heat away from the mat, but no further. So where you see the green on this drawing, where you see the mat, that's where the heat's going to be. The triangle with the two little lines by the T with the circle in it, that's the beginning of the mat. The square is at the end of the mat. So it shows you where to begin, and then each run, what the length is and what you need to do next. And the T is the thermostat.
Right. So you need to let us know where the thermostat is because that's going to set up how we design the system. So if you look there, that little 3-foot section there at the beginning with the triangle in it, if the thermostat was actually in the lower right-hand corner of this drawing, the T, the cable wouldn't be long enough. The cold lead, which is part of the heating system that actually doesn't heat up, it's only 15 feet. So if you put the thermostat on the other side of the room than what we drew, then there's a good chance that that cold lead is not going to reach from the spot that's shown to start as opposed to where the thermostat is. So if you say, hey, you know what, I got your drawing, but it looks like the thermostat's going to be in this lower right-hand corner, just let us know, and we'll redo that drawing for you to get the start point in that lower right corner instead of at the upper left-hand corner.
Yeah, and I want to add, so let's say you've got a customer coming in and you're going to be quoting this and you're not sure where the thermostat is. You don't need to know where the thermostat is to give a quote. As long as the area of the room doesn't change dramatically, the price isn't going to change. You just, if they decide to order, make sure you know where the thermostat is. We can turn around a drawing, a plan. You can send us an updated drawing or give us the location. we're going to get it back to you next day. Many times, depending on the workload, we can do it in the same day. So it's something that we can very quickly adjust for you. And we're set up to change plans and do redesigns and accommodate what you need.
If you have any questions about what these little drawings inside the plan mean, just give us a call. We'll go over freeform, all that other stuff. That's for a different webinar, not for here. But what I do want to address your attention to is if you look at the lower part of the installation plan, down here is where the electrical specs are. So here you see how many watts the product is, how many amps the product is, what size breaker it takes.
Yep.
All that information is included there. So when you get this plan, you can give it to the electrician and go, here's what we need, and go ahead and install it. And that's what's so great about this plan.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes to your electrician and to your installer. So let's talk about these odd looking things. Are these from a sci-fi movie from the 1950s?
They could be. It's possible, but actually what they are is a couple of devices, simple devices. They're not difficult to use to make sure that what you're installing is working the way it should and that there's no problems as you're installing. So you need both of these. The circuit check, what the circuit check does is it's just going to make sure that there's continuity. In other words, you have a circuit throughout the cable, and that's what you're going to use once you're ready to install. The other,
once you're doing the cuts and turns.
Once you're doing the cuts and turns.
That's where the scissors come out, and scissors and electric wire sometimes don't make a good match.
Yeah, and then the product you're going to use first, and like literally when you get the package, you get the delivery of the product, the first thing you're going to want to do is to take the floor heating out and do an ohms test. It's a very, very simple test to do. We're going to include instructions on how to do that in the packaging. And like we said, we've got 24/7 tech support. So if you want someone to walk you through it step by step, we certainly can. Very, very simple to do. You do that right away when you open the product. And then you're going to do it after you've laid it down. And any other times you should ohm test?
Well, you need to make sure it's good before you install.
Exactly.
The absolute worst thing you can do is install a product that arrived damaged because you don't know if it's good or bad or not. And this scientific thing looking in the lower right-hand corner, something that Buster Crabbe would use in a 30s sci-fi movie as handcuffs or something, that's really a digital ohmmeter. And those are very inexpensive. Yeah. So no job should be done without a digital ohmmeter. Back in the day, those ohmmeters were, that one would probably sell for $200 to $300. Now they're $15. So there's no reason to not have one of those. So you always want to make sure that you're installing a good product. You have to test it first to make sure it's good. So once you do that, you then test it before you start cutting and turning. You put the circuit check on before you do the cuts and turns. Then you do your cuts and turns, you lay it out. You then test it with the ohm meter again. And then if it tests good after that, then you go ahead and put the floor covering on and test it one final time. And you write that down in the installation manual and you give it to the customer. Or if you're the customer, keep that with you because that's your record that the floor was installed and it worked correctly when it was put in.
Yeah, the one thing to mention real quick on that, also a good thing to do with the circuit check is to leave it on once you're completely done with the job before the electrician has come to install the thermostat. Leave it on and leave it installed and turned on if other trades are going to still be working in there. Because if another trade, let's say a plumber comes in and decides, oh, I need to add something, for this, freestanding tub.
I'll drill a hole over there and drill a hole over there.
Right. Or something moves and somebody needs to drill something or put in a door stop. Somebody just decides to do something unusual. The alarm will go off if they do hit a wire, and that'll let them know there's a problem right away, and that can be addressed.
So let's move on to the next tip, and this one is given to us by Mike at MK Design Build. And tell us about this one, setting the foundation.
So the floor prep is something that's necessary whether or not you're installing floor heating. If you're installing floor heating, it's just as important as if you're not installing floor heating. No matter what, for most flooring types, you want to start with a nice level surface, if it's a foundation, any cracks are repaired, all of that sort of thing. And when you're doing this, one thing that you want to do is you're going to follow the instructions that the manufacturer gives you, the way you mix it, whether or not you need to use a primer. Everyone is a little different. There's nothing dramatically difficult about it. It's a step-by-step process. And then probably the other thing to keep in mind is to make sure that you are blocking anywhere where the self-leveling can drain. The self-leveling, when you mix it, is like a slurry or soupy almost consistency, and it's going to flow to an even flat surface. That's exactly what it's supposed to do. But because it flows like that, if there is a door or a vent or anything like that, you're going to have to put a little dam around it to stop it from flowing in there.
Also, you want to make sure that the floor doesn't have any holes in it either, because then if you have a basement and you have poured this stuff and all of a sudden you go to the basement and there's a pool, you know that you didn't seal up all your holes. So usually when you're going out and you're doing a remodel, you want to go out and look at the floor, pull all the nails out that you have to pull out, but make sure they don't pull a chunk of the floor out with them, because as soon as you pour that self-leveling, it's going to go and try to get as low as it can in the house, and that means your basement. So you want to make sure that you check that out.
Absolutely.
So I love this picture because you can tell right by looking at the picture that it's self-leveling. It's not Thinset, because it's like a mirror. You can see the reflection off of that. So that's what's so good. Remember, when you're leveling the floor, get it level first, then put the cables on.
Absolutely.
Don't put them at the bottom and then pour self-leveling over the entire thing. And Greg talked a little bit about it, but we've talked to people who install these systems in really old houses. In really old houses, in the second floor, they tend to have a room that's kind of shaped like a bowl because it sags over the years. And what happens is the section in the center could be 3 inches deep, and the sections at the other edge could be 1 or a half inch thick. So the thinner it is, the more it's going to heat. The thicker it is, the longer it'll take to heat, and it may not yield satisfactory results. So you want to watch out for that. So here I love these two slides next to each other, because you can tell what the correct mix of self-leveling looks like, and now you can see what the correct mix of Thinset looks like. So tell us about how to apply Thinset with electric floor heating.
So it's the same thing with Thinset that it is with self-leveling, that each Thinset is going to have its own ratios as far as water to mix. Make sure you follow those. They're very important. They're there for a reason. And then applying it isn't dramatically different than you would if you were just tiling on its own. So there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can do that in a single step. So essentially what you're going to do is you're going to, what they call screed, or with the flat end of the trowel, press in Thinset enough to get it into the mat, just a very, very small amount. Back part of the tiles, the appropriate amount, whichever notch trowel you're using, depending on the size of your tile. And then you just do a section and then move on to the next section and keep on doing it. The other way to do it is sometimes I've seen where people do, and it's quite often done, where a skim coat is applied over the whole job. They let it set, and then they come back and install the other day.
That's what's so great about this picture is you can see the Thinset, once you push it down, it's going to go right through the mesh and bond to the subfloor. That's what's so great about this mesh, is that it holds the cable exactly where it needs to be, the correct distance apart. Remember, if you get your wires too far apart, it's not going to feel warm. If you get them too close together, it can overheat.
Right.
So that's what's so great about the mesh, is it holds the wire in place, and it also lets the Thinset go through, down, and bond into the subfloor, which is so great about this stuff. So when you're talking about Thinset, Don Day Electric says use modified Thinset to attach this, and we agree with that. The only time you might want to check on that is if you're using Prodeso, which is the uncoupling membrane. You want to look at the manual and see what type of subfloor you have, to see what kind of Thinset you use, whether it's modified or unmodified. Then above it, you're going to look at the instructions and see if they say modified or unmodified. But if you're not using a membrane, this is exactly what you need to do. Modified Thinset below the tile, and modified Thinset then to back butter and tile.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't want to use pre-mixed Thinset. You want to mix the Thinset on the job. Besides walls, I would avoid using any kind of a premix Thinset for floors at all. And exactly, for almost everything, it's going to be modified. Usually the one exception is over an uncoupling membrane, under tile. A lot of times unmodified is called for.
Yeah, specific issues with specific subfloors sometimes may be an unmodified also. But one thing you have to remember when you're installing the product is when the thin set is cured is when you can start turning the system on.
Sure.
So you may be asking yourself, when does this stuff cure? When does thin set cure? Well, you know it cures by the time it says on the bag.
Right.
So if that bag says cures in 21 days, you don't turn the electric floor heat on for 21 days.
Right.
Because you don't, if you heat it prematurely, sometimes you can change the molecular structure of the thin set and it doesn't bond right, it crystallizes early. So want to make sure that you do wait until the bag says after so many days you are cured. So keep that in mind. So let's talk about sensors. We've seen companies suggest multiple sensors. We've seen companies suggest putting conduit in so you can replace the sensor, which seems to be a bit of overkill sometimes. Why are two sensors better than one, and what can happen if you put 3 or 4 in?
All right. So here's the situation. So we've tracked the failure rate of the sensors that we provide, and the failure rate is extraordinarily low. It's below 1 in 10,000. It's very rare. The other side of that is that it's also very inexpensive to install a second sensor. It's under $10 and you can get another sensor installed. The only thing to kind of watch out for is to make sure that you're only attaching one. If you attach 2, the thermostat is going to essentially confuse the thermostat, and you're going to get a misread on the thermostat. You're going to get an error, and the system won't work as it should. I personally think, and we've talked about this a few times, Scott, that putting in a conduit so you can pull out the sensor and then try to fish another conduit in doesn't really make sense. You're going to spend more money.
You're going to raise the floor height.
Or have to route into the floor. It's a lot more complicated to do, and it's a lot simpler just to, if you feel the need to add that extra sensor, which is never a bad idea at all, it's a good idea, just add a separate sensor. Essentially what you want to do, if you look at the way it's installed on that on the screen there, when we have a single sensor, between another set of loops, just do another sensor. That's all.
Right. And the thing is, you don't have to run the sensor out into the middle of the floor. It can go right along the edge, about 6 to 8 inches in. So if you want to put the second sensor in, you just put it in an open loop, the one next to it, the one on one side or the one on the other side. What some people do is they will take the sensor, and you can see it's so small that they weave it inside the mesh to hold it in place while they're thin setting it over. So if you don't have any tape handy, you can just run it in and out of that green mesh, and that will hold it right exactly where you need to go.
Yep.
So let's talk about uncoupling membrane. So this membrane is blue. What's the deal with that?
So this membrane is called Prodeso. So first of all, uncoupling in general. So if you go into a very old European church, you can often be walking on a floor that's hundreds of years old and is in wonderful shape. The reason is the way they install is they uncouple the flooring from the ground, essentially. There's a layer of sand in between, and usually it's not completely rigid to the walls. There's room for expansion and movement, so that as the seasons change and it moves underneath, that movement isn't transferred up into the tile, so their tile lasts and lasts and lasts. Well, this company got the idea that they were making uncoupling membranes for the year, and they're the ones that actually introduced this idea to the marketplace. If you're already making an uncoupling membrane, and that membrane needs to have channels to hold the thin set in place, why don't we just make those channels at the right spacing, and so that you can just snap the cable into place? And it's taken off. This type of installation method has taken off. There's many companies offering products like this. A lot of installers really prefer this method over other methods. It's got the advantage of the uncoupling. It provides vapor management. It's a great product overall.
Well, there are some people that will tell you that every single floor has to have a membrane, and there are some people that say you don't need them at all.
Right.
So what are some of the things that are going to, obviously if you have a small space with very narrow centers on your joists underneath, you've got 2 layers of plywood, there's no deflection in that floor, it passes all the tests, do you need to spend the extra amount of money to put this membrane down?
You don't. The only reason you'd be buying it at that point would be to hold the cable. Another factor to keep in mind is the size of your tile. Very, very, very small tiles do not work well with uncoupling membranes. Getting them to sit level and straight and look really nice is difficult. You would much rather use just the cable with fixing strips, or the cut and turn system, or one of our custom mats, self-level over it, get a very nice smooth surface, and put the very small tile down. Another instance is a very simple layout in a large room that's on concrete. None of the products that are uncoupling membranes on the market have a very strong insulation factor when it comes to insulating for heat. We have a synthetic cork called Cerazorb that when you put that over a concrete slab, it provides a 1/4-inch crack suppressant. It's many times the insulation value of anything else, any uncoupling membrane available on the market, and that's gonna allow it to push the heat up into the room, and you end up with a very thin application. So Prodeso is wonderful for many applications. Like for myself, if I was doing a master bath with a lot of angles and I would either do a custom mat or I would do Prodeso, no doubt. Or if I was doing a larger second floor space that it passes the deflection test, but I'm still a little leery about.
I don't want to put a second layer of plywood.
Right, and I don't want to put a second layer of plywood. I'm worried about the transition from room to room, but overall it feels like the deflection is good, but I'm not sure. Definitely, a uncoupling membrane can help in those cases.
In many cases, this uncoupling membrane can actually eliminate the need for the second layer of plywood.
Yeah.
Check your installation manual with the Prodeso installation manual to give you some guidance with that.
Yeah.
But it's very, like natural stone, that sort of stuff, you probably can't get away from a second layer. But for other items like tile, regular tile, a lot of times you can. So that's what is so cool about uncoupling membranes. If you have to go in and knock a small job out in one day, that's going to be the way to do it.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about a grout flow. We're not grouting here, so what do we need a grout flow for?
It's a time saver, and it's just a way to get the job done quickly. So if you're trying to push the cable in with one hand and string it along with the other, your hands really aren't made for doing that job. If you have a float, the float will ride across all of the columns on the underlayment and just snap that wire right into place. It just speeds up the process a lot.
You want something that's resilient enough to push the cable down in,
right?
But to not damage it, though. You don't want to use a hard plastic to push it down.
Yeah, nothing with a sharp edge.
Because you can ding the wire and do that. So that's what's so good about a rubber grout float.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about replacing tiles with electric floor heat underneath. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that could be a result of lippage, where one tile sits here and the other tile sits up here. You need to bring it down. What do you need to do to make sure that when you're breaking up this one tile, it doesn't go to every other tile in the room?
Sure. So let's say you've got a problem tile, like, it could be somebody dropped something and the tile's cracked and you want to replace a cracked tile, whatever the case may be. The first thing you want to do is remove the grout all the way around, because you're going to break the tile and you're going to need to hit the tile with some force to make that happen, to break it up enough to get it up. And when you do that, what you don't want is that energy to transfer out and break any of the other tiles around it. So removing the Thinset just to the thickness of the tile. You don't want to go deeper because there's floor heating cable underneath there, so you don't want to go past the thickness of the tile itself, but it's just a matter of just carefully cleaning it out all the way around.
So we had a couple questions here that I made special notes that we would discuss when we got to that slide. However, I forgot. So we're going to just address those at the very end, because we do have a couple of really good questions from Maria and Jack and Dipti. So we're just going to create a little thing at the end.
I think I'm throwing Scott up. I haven't done one of these with him before.
That's okay. And I took the time to highlight things and everything and be prepared to fail. So anyway, we'll talk about that when we get to the end. That way it'll give you some time to come up with your own questions too, if you have any. So the one thing is, when you're doing replacing these tiles, is that you need to, first of all, you score the grout. That's going to eliminate, when you break it, the shock going into other tiles. Then once you do that, it becomes an archaeological dig. You need to then find out where that cable is. And that's why we're going to talk about in the next slide here is where this thermal camera, it's not a ray gun or anything, but it's a thermal camera. So as we move into this slide, what are we going to be doing here?
So I used one of these this morning actually on a job site, and it doesn't, it's not anything futuristic, but it almost feels like it when you use it. Once you turn on the floor and the floor starts to energize, before breaking up the tile, you can even do this if you want to see where the wires are. But especially after you have the tiles removed, a thermal imaging camera, but basically what you do, you just shoot it at it, and that multicolor picture you see on the screen, the orange and red part are obviously, that's the cable. It literally shows you precisely where the cable is. And you can hold the camera so that you can then mark where the cable is, so you can kind of dig around that to remove enough Thinset so that you can get extra Thinset in there to put back down a new tile.
Right, so what you want to do is you want to mark where that cable is with a magic marker, and then what you want to do is you want to start right in between. So if you have two cables that are 3 inches apart, you take that chisel and you start breaking up in between those two.
Yeah.
Eventually, you're going to try to liberate all the Thinset so you can get a fresh floor there.
Mm-hmm.
You're ideally just going to have the wire and the subfloor there, and that will allow you to put new Thinset and back butter the tile and stick it down in there. Sometimes you can't get all of it out of there, but the more you can remove without damaging the cable, the better off you are. So after you use the thermal camera to find the location of the wires, you want to take the circuit check, attach it to the cold lead. So you're going to take the thermostat out of the wall, put the circuit check on the wires, and then at that point you're going to start chiseling, because if you chisel and you hit the wrong spot, that alarm is going to chirp and say, hey, whatever you just did compromised the wire. So you need to address that too. So the good thing is you can fix it while you're in there if that happens, because you've already exposed the spot. Half the problem is sometimes getting that tile broken in the correct spot to find out where that is. So that's why it's so important if you have the thermal camera to use it. And also if you save your circuit check, you can use it for any time you have to do something like this.
Mm-hmm.
So let's call out on tip number 9, and that's Mike once again. And Mike has this information about managing the cold lead paths. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to let Greg talk about that, but before we get into that, we need to say what these parts are first of all. So this is a spool of cable, and you can see at the top of the picture, you see the end cap. That's where you have two wires running next to each other. That's where they connect, and that's where you make your circuit. So that's the end, okay? So then you can see that there is a burgundy or Merlot cable there. That's the part that heats up. If you take a look at that big clump there, that's the factory splice. That factory splice is where the cold lead, which doesn't heat, meets the heating wire. So everything from the factory splice to the left in that picture, all that except for the spool itself, needs to be buried in Thinset. So the thing is, you want to make sure that the end cap, the heating wire, and the factory splice is embedded in Thinset or self-leveling. The cold lead part doesn't have to be, because all it's doing, it's getting the power from the thermostat down to the floor, and that's where it hooks up. So what do we need to do to manage these cold lead paths, except for, one thing we need to do that Mike really didn't talk about is where the factory splice is thicker, you need to allow for that too. So you're going to want to know where that factory splice is going to be sitting on the floor, because you may have to chisel out a little bit there to get the splice down so you can get a nice low rise on your tile.
Or if you're using Prodeso, it fits well within the thickness of the Prodeso.
Yeah, so you may just have to cut out a little spot for that splice to fit in. So what do we do when we're routing these cold leads?
Well, one thing, if you get a plan from us and the thermostat is noted on the plan, we're going to make sure that the cold lead reaches to where you start the wire, first of all, and that you're not having to cross any cable to get back to the thermostat, because you never want to cross the cold lead and the heated wire, and you want as little of that cold lead in the room. Really, it doesn't heat anything, it just carries power. So you want to have the placement of that in a place that makes sense for the overall design of the room, and we can help you with that with the design. One thing that Mike suggested here is never nail too close to the leads and use construction adhesive. So, this lead is going to go, depending on what your code is, usually in a rigid conduit up the wall, but there's going to be a section of it that will be not in rigid conduit, that's in thinset underneath, and that maybe is going up to the base plate of the wall where they're going to be nailing trim. A lot of times over that section there, they'll put a little metal piece to protect it. But in any case, it's not a great idea right around that cable to nail. So he suggested using construction adhesive in that area, which is a great idea.
And sometimes you have to run the cold lead along the wall a small distance, maybe a foot or 2 feet or 3 feet or whatever it is, around the perimeter of the room to get back to where the thermostat is. Well, you'd want to let the trim guys know that there's cable running under there, because the trim guys, when they're putting the nails in, need to make sure that they're going this way, not this way. Because once they go at an angle into that trim, they can hit the cable below the trim.
Right.
So you might want to talk to the trim guys when they're coming in to put the trim in, is to make sure that they're nailing straight, not down. Because if you're nailing down, there's a chance of you hitting that cold lead.
And it's not a problem we run into often, because it's the way it works is you're going to go straight down from the thermostat into the room right to where the heating starts. So there isn't a tremendous amount of cold lead usually anywhere close to a wall.
Except if you might have a second mat.
Right, if you have a second mat,
you might have to run it over there.
And then most of that is running under thinset in the rest of the room anyway, and not a place where you would normally nail. So it's not a problem. It's not a problem that you run into often, but it's something that you might as well, prevent any possible issues.
Right. And if you do happen to have that situation, it's difficult to troubleshoot that one. So that's why we bring that up, is because it's hard to see a failure when it's covered by a piece of trim. Right. So you want to keep that, and that would be a good idea. So now what we're going to do is we're going to turn back the clock, and we're going to talk about some questions that we had submitted to us ahead of time. And that will give you to punch in some questions of your own. And we were talking about the installation under different surfaces. And this was a question from Maria. Is installation different under stone composite flooring, which is sometimes an LVT with stone dust put into it, a brand name like Gemcore?
So yes, in a very short answer, but to go into detail here. So luxury vinyl tile is a really far-encompassing name. It's a really large product category right now, and it can mean from very rigid boards that if you looked at them from a little bit of a distance, you would think they were a laminate, like a pergo floor or something like that, to floors that more resemble the thickness of old-fashioned vinyl sheet goods that are really super flexible. So the products are all over the place. Like for instance, Gemcore recommends that you put a half an inch separation between the cable and their floor. So you're going to have to, a combination of either thinset and self-leveling or self-leveling, cover the product with a half an inch before putting the Gemcore on top. Now, the one thing to very much keep in mind is that we're very careful to try to give the best recommendations we can. So when we're talking to somebody, we try to get the exact product they're using. And then if I'm here at the office, I'll Google the exact name of the product, installation, and then I usually include PDF because it just the result jumps right to the top. And I read it carefully to find out what they require for radiant heat, because these standards change. Usually when a product is first launched, they're very cautious about working with any radiant heat. Then it's on the market for a while, it's tested more, it's proven in installations in the field, and the requirements become more and more lenient. I'm starting to see now with certain products like this where they say, follow radiant heat manufacturer's instructions, and they don't give you any other special instructions. So the market's learning that the radiant heat is really no different than installing in a sunroom or any place where the floor is going to get a little warm, close to a heating vent, whatever. It doesn't dramatically affect most of these floors, but you still do want to be careful to make sure that your warranty is going to be in place and read those installation instructions.
Yeah, when they say it needs to be embedded, I'm going to tell you from a personal experience standpoint, I've walked on floors that are heated under LVT. I've walked on LVT floors that have self-leveling with the wire embedded, and I've walked on floors where they covered the heating wire with Thinset.
Mm-hmm.
My word of advice is do not try to save money by using Thinset over self-leveling.
Right.
And the reason why is that floor that I walked on, self-leveling felt nice, solid. It felt like a wood product or a tile product. It felt really good. And
it looks better too.
And it sounded good. You didn't hear that hollow sound. And then I walked on a floor where they tried to save some money using Thinset. And if you've ever put Thinset down, you know that it's if you mix it correctly, which you're supposed to do, very difficult to get it completely flat.
Right.
Very, very difficult to get a large room to get the Thinset completely flat. And if you don't, if you got little peaks here and there, what happens is that you've got a peak that sits like this, and that LVT tries to teeter-totter over it. The area over here is going to sound hollow when you step on it, and the area over here is going to sound hollow, and it'll sound okay here.
Right.
So my word of advice.
Yeah, and there's another thing to that which I'll just mention real quick. This has nothing to do with floor heating, really. It has to do with the way some more flexible LVT products work. A lot of them, what they count on to do the locking, especially the very flexible ones, they count on a very level floor. So the one channel locks into the other channel all the way levelly across, because if you step onto a point and it's not completely level and you depress one side where there's a connection, you could unconnect where it's connected. So it's following their instructions. Once again, nothing to do with floor heat really, and making sure that, you know, some of those out there really you want it to be as level as possible.
Right. So just take it. I mean, someone's going to try to talk you into using Thinset instead of self-leveling. My word of advice is after actually being on both, you don't want the hollow sound. You don't want the teeter-tottering of that Thinset. I mean, you may save $20 on the job.
I don't know. Even no matter how much you save, you don't want the callbacks. You don't want the problems. Make sure you're using the LVT manufacturer's instructions to a T.
So we have another question. This one's from Jack, and I see we have a question from, is that Lefty? We have a question from Lefty that we're going to get into in just a second. One of the other questions was, how many coats of Thinset do you need to use? And there's going to be two different answers. One with the Prodeso, one Letty. I'm sorry about that, Letty. I thought maybe you were a former left-handed pitcher. But how many coats do you typically need of Thinset when you're doing an installation?
So like we talked about with for the TempZone rolls, it depends on your preferred method of installation.
And your experience level.
You know, it's someone who's done this for a few times. What they end up doing in the field, one method is to do a small area. You're going to screed in, just barely push into the mat with the flat end of the trowel, enough Thinset to just barely cover the mat, back butter the tiles to the appropriate amount, depending on the tile thickness or tile dimension, tile size, and then go. Or the two-step method is do a skim coat over the entire area, let that set, and then come back and kind of tile as usual.
And what another thing is, another great suggestion is, instead of doing either one of those, is attach the cable to the subfloor very, very well and cover it with self-leveling.
Yeah.
Because then you've got a completely flat surface, especially if you're doing 2-inch or smaller tile.
Any mosaic, any small tile, subway tile, whatever type of tile it is. If it's small tile, self-leveling is in my mind a must.
So we also had a question following that by Dipty, and that is, what is the max tile thickness that they can use and still have a warm floor?
So the absolute max you want to go from the top of the heating cable to the top of the tile is about 1.5 inches. So that's
somewhere between 1 to 1.5.
Right.
1 being the best, 1.5 being the outlier.
Right. And you know, staying at about 1, a little more for that, and we're going to come to a shower bench if need be for a bench or something, can work fine. So that's going to be the maximum distance you're going to want to have. Another thing that we've already kind of talked about, it's the overall distance. You know, you got to think about how you're going to lay out the layers, and if you're using self-leveling, so that distance from where the cable is to the top is the same throughout the entire room, so you have nice even heating.
Yeah, so I did a little math there, and knowing that we like to have the cable about an inch away from the top of the tile, so you get the most warm output. The Thinset layer is going to be about 3/8 of an inch. That's what you're going to start with because that's kind of like your heat bank.
Yep.
So it's either going to be 3/8 of an inch of Thinset or self-leveling. So if you're aiming for the 1-inch sweet spot, you can use up to about a 1/2 inch thick tile and have really, really good results.
Yeah.
You just have to keep in mind that the further away the surface gets from the wire, the cooler it's going to feel and the longer it will take to heat up.
Yeah, and it may not even be the cooler if you give it enough time. It's
Right.
it's where it's really going to affect it is the amount of time. So like for instance, if you've got, I was going to say a shower and a bench. Again, there was a good question.
Let's
We
go
keep on
ahead.
talking about
Let's
it.
Let's answer Letty's question.
So well, the bench will take longer to get warmer than the tile on the floor if you're using thin tile on the floor in the shower than on the bench. So let's back up though, and in general, how do you shower? How is a shower and floor seat heated? So the products we showed you here are all certified for wet installation, so they can go right into the shower. We've got mats that are bench sizes, and we've got mats that are commonly found shower sizes that even have a center drain, so you have space to put the center drain. And where you want to install those is it's in the same layer of the application of the Thinset that's holding down the tile. In other words, right below the tile. So that same Thinset that holds down the tile, that's where the mesh or the wire is.
Right. So the common sense when you're thinking about heating a shower or heating a bench or heating anything is where does that cable go? As close to the surface, about an inch from the surface as you can. So if you have a pre-made shower pan and it's this thick and it's EPS, it's like styrofoam, you're not going to put the cable underneath that because the heat will never get through the styrofoam.
Never.
The heat's got to go on top of it. We get that question all the time. So when you're thinking about that, from now on, you don't need to remember really much of anything except that I need to try to keep that cable within an inch, inch and a half of the top of the tile. And the same goes with the bench seat. That's how Greg was mentioning the bench seat differs from the floor of the shower because usually the shower floor are regular size, regular thickness tiles, but the bench is possibly an inch thick of granite.
Right, or marble cap or whatever it is, yeah.
So that would be a case where you might actually want to put the shower bench, which we have bench sizes as he talked about. You would just attach those there, put Thinset down and set your cap on top of it. You might want to actually put that on its own thermostat to make sure that it's turned up higher and comes on earlier than the rest of the shower. Mm-hmm. So that's something you want to think about too. And you also want to, if you're thinking about putting heat in the shower, sometimes you can use the same mat. Let's say that you have an edge drain or a trough drain somewhere else that doesn't have the specific one right in the center or it's off center, you can still use our cut and turn mats or our cables. You can set it in there and then run the cable up the wall to the bench to get that bench heated up too. So you can use the same product. What we do suggest though is if you're heating a shower and heating the bathroom, that you use an individual cable or individual system for the shower in addition to one in the bathroom. And it just makes sense because you can control them separately. You can make one get warmer than the other. You can have it come on a little bit earlier or whatever. If you know you take your shower in the morning, you never take it at night, then you can have the shower just come on in the morning. Whereas the rest of the bathroom can go on in the morning and then at night too when you're getting ready for bed.
And I've talked to customers that like to keep the shower like really hot. They put the shower area really, really, really warm, especially like a big open area shower, because they're trying to add as much heat into that space. So if they step out of the water, they're still warm. But if it's that hot in the bathroom, I mean, our systems are often used as a primary heat source. So we always want to help you with the calculations to understand if it'll work for a primary heat source, but they are. So if you've got the shower blasting away and it's on the same thermostat as the bathroom, you may be actually too warm in the bathroom.
Right. So that's a great question, Letty, and sorry I called you Lefty. Let's go ahead and talk about our next webinar. And our next webinar is going to be entitled Floor Heating Cable Installation, Uncoupling Membranes versus Fixing Strips. We kind of talked about it today, but this is a high level. We glossed over it pretty well, pretty quickly, but we'll get really in depth on that next time. And that's Thursday, July 12th of this year. It's at 1 p.m. Central Time. So make sure you join us for that one. Greg, since you are in sales, tell us about the monthly promotion.
Free ground shipping. That's that. So just give us a call. We'll be happy to get you a quote. We can get you a quote on square footage. We highly recommend you get floor plans. It's a free service. It makes the installation simpler no matter what product you're using. Definitely not required. I know people that once they get used to using the uncoupling membrane, they often stop asking us for that, and that's completely fine as well. So give us a call and we'll help you out.
So we do value your feedback, and you can see most of this webinar was based on questions that we had submitted to us. So we really, really like your feedback. Tell us what you want us to talk about, things that you might need brushed up on, or any more tips installing radiant panels, putting towel bars up, anything like that that we sell. You'd like more information about it, just drop us a line. You're going to be getting an email right after this webinar, or shortly after. And please tell us what you thought of the webinar, and we would suggest any ideas that you have for future ones. Throw those in there too. Also, contact us. We're here if you have any questions. As Greg said, we said,
please.
If you have any installation issues, if you're in the middle of installing a floor and you have any doubt, call us. You can get us 24/7 at 800-875-5285. You can also email us. And Jay Billen, that's our boss. That's the owner of the company, Julia Billen. You can email her at jbillen@WarmlyYours.com. Or if you just want some more information about what we sell, what the prices are, is it available, how do you install it, that sort of stuff, email us at info.com. You can check us out on the web and also on Facebook under Warmly Yours. And we're putting stuff on our social media accounts all the time. There's lots of good pictures there. A lot of it submitted by folks like you who've done a specific job, said, hey, this is what it looks like. So if you want to get some design ideas, that's a perfect place to go for that. So I'd like to thank Greg for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Scott.
And until next time, stay warm and be radiant.
Bye-bye.